Mia's condition improved, and miraculously, she's now on the road to a full recovery, a road that included a quick return to the water.
As soon as Mia got out of the hospital, the first thing I wanted to do was get her back into the water because she loves swimming, and we were really nervous that this accident would have prevented her from probably ever swimming again.
The more frequent outcome is a story that's become far too familiar for Arizona families, and one the city of Maricopa is determined to rewrite with a program called Maricopa Swims Safe in the Water.
The Maricopa Swim Safe in the Water program is designed for kids, and essentially the purpose of that is to start teaching kids at an early age how to be able to assist themselves in the instance that they fall into the water.
Suspended during the pandemic, the program is now making a comeback. Participating elementary schools bus first graders to Copper Sky for their immersive classes.
This is 4 45-minute sessions. The first 10 minutes we go over talking about water safety and going through our safety ranger program. And then we spend the rest of the time in the water going from not being comfortable to put their face in the water to being able to jump in the deep end, float on their back, and get out of the water safely.
The goal is to eventually expand the program throughout the district and invite charter schools into the pool as well. In order to get there, the community has the chance to suit up.
We can't do it without instructors, and we pay pretty decent, and it's a lot of fun. You get a free Copper Sky membership. We can't do these programs without instructors, so I hope anybody seeing this that has 3 or 4 hours open in their morning or early afternoon could come by and learn how to be an instructor.
Knowing that what I'm doing is ultimately going to help them in the long run, there's no better feeling like it.
A feeling of satisfaction for instructors and a sense of security for families like the Prestons, who found in Mia's story a new conviction for these life-saving skills.
CPR certification and swim safety with lessons is like, that's all we could advocate. We'll use her platform and her story to sell that for the rest of our lives.
Swimming.
In case you pull something.
Hold up! Go. Hey Maricopa, it's me, Sergeant Hal Cruiser. I'm here with my friends here at the police department. We've got a brand new tool that's going to help our officers out on the street keep everybody safe. It's called a bolo wrap.
We're implementing bolo wrap for the first time at MPD. It's a new technology that doesn't use pain compliance to work. It prevents us from using taser, baton, pepper spray, which are pain compliance tools, and we're excited to be using it. It wraps around a person, takes a Kevlar cable with hooks on the end, kind of like Spider-Man, wraps a person up so they can't take a step, they can't move their arm.
This is our faith, and we will overcome. No, we don't play. Whoa, whoa. So walk with the grace. You got to pay the price. No time to waste. Whoa, we will overcome.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner LaFall. Vice Chair Robertson.
Here.
Chair Yoakum.
Here.
Commissioner Irving.
Here.
Commissioner Frank.
Here.
Commissioner Singleton.
Here.
Chair Yoakum, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd like to introduce a new commissioner, Mr. James Singleton, who is sitting on to my extreme left. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Call to the public. If you wish to speak, please complete a speaker card and submit to the chairman prior to the start of the meeting. The procedures to follow if you address the commission are commission requests that you express your ideas in 5 minutes or less and refrain from any personal attacks or derogatory statements about any city employee, a fellow citizen, or anyone else, whether in the audience or not. The chairman will limit discussion whenever he deems such an action appropriate to the proper conduct of the meeting. I am going to ask for the minutes, please. Everybody has read the minutes. Do we have a motion? Have an approval and a motion made. A second? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're now at our regular agenda. Does anyone have a speaker card that they would like to submit? Okay. Let's go to item number PZ 23-03, Planning Commission update. Kevin Kugler with Michael Baker International LLC will provide the Planning and Zoning Commission an update regarding the Western Pinell County, City of Maricopa Area Transportation Plan, and this is discussion only.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, to be before you and slip into your busy normal agenda and schedule. As the Chair introduced, my name is Kevin Kugler. I'm a principal with Michael Baker, the whole international thing. Hi, Dan. Sounded like a 800-pound gorilla, but I assure you, at least myself and my team that is not here but surrounds me on this project, just a little bit about myself. I'm born and raised in Arizona and been here my entire life. And have served in a variety of different capacities, both as a staff person on the municipal planning front, having served as a planning manager in a very fast-growing suburb of Phoenix. Also serving in your capacity, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, serving on my hometown planning commission until they got rid of me and turned me out after a certain number of years, and then they threw me out. But before you, this evening I'm here as the leader of the Transportation Planning Group at Michael Baker in Phoenix, and we are extremely excited to be working with your talented staff to assist you all in the development of, as the name implies, the area transportation plan, both for Pinell County and the City of Maricopa. And so my hat's off to staff for collaborating with Pinell County and looking at this in a holistic term. I know that term is often overused, obviously, but this is a very large study area, 230 square miles, and it's a great opportunity, as I don't need to tell you in Maricopa, as you're rapidly growing in the surrounding area, to take a look at. Oh, thank you. No, yeah, thank you. Forgot to ask. At this study in this important area. So, without further ado, I know I have the city manager right behind me on the schedule, so I don't want to take much of his time. The purpose of tonight's agenda is basically to introduce you all to the project, give you a brief overview of the study area, some of the tasks at a high level that we're going to be undertaking, talk about the roles and responsibilities of a couple different groups that are going to oversee ourselves as consultants, make sure we stay on the straight and narrow and guide us along the way. And then I think most importantly for the discussion tonight is really to hear from you all, is to get your input and have some discussion from you all and what's important to you to help kind of set, as I like to say, our compass for guiding this effort as we move forward. So we want to make sure we're in tune with not only what the staff and, of course, City Council, but also as the Planning Commission giving us guidance for this particular project. So briefly, as you see on the slide before you, the study area map, it basically is coterminous or synonymous with the City of Maricopa municipal planning area boundary. Okay, it includes, of course, Maricopa, the city limits, which, as you know, is 43 plus or minus square miles, and the entire planning area that is minus of course, the auction community, which is, of course, a key stakeholder in our study, but we are not planning any transportation facilities on any tribal lands, of course, adjacent proximity. And that holds true for the Gila River Indian community as well. So as you can see, the study area boundary and the red solid line, you should recognize that as being, again, the Maricopa planning area, which includes a lot of Pinell County and a tremendous number of entitled lots, at least on paper, in Pinell County in those areas outside your city limits proper, as I'm sure you're aware. The purpose and the objectives of the study, I know there's a lot of words on the slide. I'll try to be brief, but first and foremost, it's relating the transportation system to the existing and future land uses in the community and the programs that serve them. It's improving the multimodal transportation circulation for not only people, the movement of people, but also the movement of goods for motorized and non-motorized transportation modes and facilities. Okay, this is a multimodal study. Number 3, looking at safe, efficient, and accessible, context-sensitive transportation systems that are, of course, cost-effective or recognize cost, being cost-conscious, ensuring compliance with federal transportation regulations, and number 5, certainly identifying and prioritize future roadway projects, both in the near term and the long term for implementation, okay? Bear with me, there's a handful of more of it. It's important to kind of underscore these because it is a multifaceted study. Number 6 is important. It's looking to aim at delivering sufficient capacity for multimodal infrastructure, both in the city and in the county, for future, again, residences, businesses, and of course, recognizing the land uses. So it's like what I like to say is right-sizing the roadways, making sure there is sufficient capacity. When it comes to vehicles, of course, proper number of lanes and signals for accommodating the future land uses. And as number 7 says, it's comparing those future roadway conditions to existing roadway conditions with 2 future growth scenarios, okay, that will identify to determine an LOS or level of service for each of those scenarios. So I think it's important to underscore, and I'm sure you're aware of the collaboration with the Maricopa Association of Governments, who keeps the travel demand model for the region. We will be collaborating closely with them, and when I say providing for 2 future growth scenarios, we'll work with your staff to determine kind of a high and a low, if you will. It's much more complicated than that, but for simplistic purposes, a couple different growth scenarios. We'll plug those numbers into the model and see what we have in terms of vehicular transportation. There's a whole nother aspect to the other modes with that regard. So number 8 is providing simply put, a user-friendly plan that's really easy for you all, staff and council, to use as a guide. The plan that you have on the books now is a solid plan. Nothing wrong with the plan, but I think one might suggest it's a little difficult to navigate at times. You have to look at a few different spots, so we're going to bring some simplicity to that as we update your plan. And then last but not least, it's updating a couple specific tables that are in the existing 2017 plan. Basically, it looks at cost estimates and implementation matters with respect to specific projects. The planning process, just in a real nutshell, is basically formulated, as the slide suggests, in a series of phases that's going to be collaborative in nature with both public and stakeholders, providing input and guidance throughout the process at key milestones. So, as you can see, the phases of a typical transportation study such as this, which you may or may not be familiar with, where we have the proverbial project setup and initiation in the first couple phases, of which we have been doing our homework and working with staff to collect data and get the lay of the land, for lack of a better term, with respect to all things data. And then as we're moving forward right now, kind of on the cusp of phase 3 for current conditions reporting, and that's why we're here seeing you to get your input to guide us as we start to put ink to paper here in the near future. And then we'll get into phase 4, which I touched on, is that future conditions reporting with those growth scenarios I was referring to on the objective slide. And then we will come up with a series of recommended transportation improvements, and then, of course, have some final recommendations and hopeful adoption in the spring of 2024 is when we'd be looking to button up this particular project. So how does that translate into a series of milestones, just at a high level? So I mentioned public and stakeholder input. I'm pleased to report to you and would encourage you all to take the online community survey that's now on the city's website, and as planning commissioners, spread the word to your neighbors and friends to get as much input as we possibly can. So the study will be, the strength of this study is only as good as the input that we get to help support it and guide it. So we certainly encourage that, and I'm pleased to report that this afternoon, it's only been up for a few days, we already have about 150 some odd responses. So the word is spreading, which is great. So project website, online community survey, they're online. I'll give the website, if you're not aware of it already, at the end of the presentation here. I mentioned that there's going to be the first technical memo is an existing conditions overview. We're in the process of kicking that off. A draft of that will be available in the first part of March. We'll also be accompanied by an environmental overview tech memo that was at the request of Pinal County for those county areas only for a high-level kind of desktop review environmental overview. Public meeting, open house meeting number 1 will be an in-person open house meeting to occur sometime around middle of May. So there'll be ample notice and advertisement for that particular open house at a location yet to be determined, at which time we will then unveil the existing conditions overview and have a series of exercises to get community input and guide us on priorities, basically. Then we roll into tech memo number 3, which is the future conditions and that growth scenario analysis and a roadway needs assessment, both in the near term and the long term that I think I touched on already. And then we get into where the real fun begins at tech memo number 4, where we develop a series of evaluation criteria and develop a plan of improvements, again, across all modes of transportation. And those evaluation criteria will be both qualitative and quantitative in nature, a mixture. And then at some point in late 2023 or early 24, depending on how we hit with the holidays and such, we'll have public open house meeting number 2, where we will then roll out, if you will, those draft recommendations to yourselves, to the public, all your friends and neighbors. They'll come to that meeting and tell us, hey, we like what you did here. Maybe you missed the target on this. Can we adjust priorities there? That kind of discussion. So there'll be a lot of interactive maps and discussions. And then from there, with that public input, we go to the draft final transportation plan with the benefit of that public input to roll out the draft plan. And then we're back before you, commissioners, in February, March-ish of 2024 to let you know what those recommendations are, what we've heard from the public, get buy-in and hopeful support from you all. And then after you all, then we will brief the city council on the same type of schedule and agenda on those draft recommendations, and then bring forward finally the final transportation plan. So, myself and my co-workers, who of course aren't with me tonight, but I assure you I have a team of planners and engineers around me supporting myself, and not to mention your staff doing a lot of lifting for us inside these walls to help. But who else is helping guide this and oversee the process? Well, there is this project work group, as we've called it, which is a cross-section of city staff and county staff. And their roles and responsibilities, as it shows on the slide there, is to provide comments to myself and my team on all of our deliverables, our draft products that we submit, those technical memos that I just mentioned. We have monthly progress meetings to talk about where we're at, what we need. We're ahead on this, we're behind on this, and have those candid discussions, which are great. And assist and facilitate in the data collection process, which has been ongoing, and we certainly appreciate Eduardo, who we've been peppering left and right with those, so thank you, Eduardo, for being responsive on that. And then they're going to help assist and provide a correspondence review with the stakeholder work group, which is the next group I'm going to talk about, which is, as the name implies, the stakeholder work group is basically a set of your sister agencies who have any kind of interest within the community, as those entities that you see on the screen there, ADOT, Arizona State Land Department, Ak-Chin Indian Community, Gila River Indian Community, Casa Grande Electric District Number 3, Global Water, UP, Sun Corridor, MPO, and BLM primarily are the agencies that are on the stakeholder work group. And what will happen with them is that once we have draft of those various technical memos that we complete at key milestones in the process, they will receive copies of those technical memos and have an opportunity to provide input and comment from giving us input from their respective agencies' missions and objectives. And so we've already completed, there's a total of 5 rounds there in terms of kind of touch points with that stakeholder work group at those milestones, and we've already had round number 1 in terms of sending them a project fact sheet and letting them know the project is commencing, much like we're doing tonight. So I'm certainly available for any comments or questions, and I apologize if I'm talking a little fast because I'm trying to reserve as much time to close my mouth and turn up my ears so I can listen to you all. Give me some guidance on what I like to call issues and concerns and objectives that you may or may not have with respect to a transportation plan in your community. So just a couple bullet points on the slide there to kind of help prime the pump and get your juices flowing with respect to comments. This can include anything on, obviously, in your daily travels, things that drive you nuts, whether it's congestion or it's a signal that's not operating right, or it's a long-term left delay, or it's safety issues. So physical opportunities and constraints, operations, congestion. Is there important connections, gaps in existing roadways or connections that you feel need to be made? And I know you all in this room have had some form of discussion on these issues at different levels of activity on the dais that you see all the time. Future large development activities. Of course, we're getting that information from staff and have some familiarity, but if there's something that you really want to elevate in importance, please let me know. Any important on-street or off-street bicycle or pedestrian connections? Bless you. And resident property owner comments and complaints. You know, you guys are on commission. Who's been in your ear on issues that you need to pass along to me? Or if there's any other stakeholders or methods of public outreach or things you want us to be mindful or considerate of when we get to the public open house stage. So that's just a few things just to throw out there. Anything else that you have on your minds is open for discussion. And with that, I thank you for your time on this brief presentation and look forward to engaging in the discussion. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Not through the mic. There
Is
you
it
go.
on now? Okay. I thank you for an interesting presentation. I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners if they have any concerns or comments or questions that they would like to ask or bring up.
So my first question is, how will the information be disseminated? Are you going to utilize the HOA newsletters? It would just be on the city website, Chamber of Commerce? What avenues are you going to use to communicate the information so that the public will be informed?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner LaFalle, great question. Is it with respect to the public meetings in particular? Yeah, we will certainly be working with your staff to, and county staff for that matter, to use the tried and true measures that they feel to reach the most and best outreach. I'm sure all the above are open for consideration, but we will be working with and deferring to your communication staff to help get the word out, for lack of a better term. The project website will certainly be a repository for all things of this project. The technical memos, once they're ready for public consumption, will be posted there. As well, as will all meeting notices as well.
Next, and I thank you for the suggestions here because some of these were on my radar. One of them is the off-street and the bike trail connections and even the on-street, because right now there are certain areas where the bike lanes are fairly narrow, but I don't know how we can expand them due to the nature of the land that's adjacent. So has there been consideration or discussions to see how those interconnections might be expanded? And what I'm thinking of right now is on Honeycutt Road. Is it east of White and Parker by the bridge? That area, that entire, sometimes driving down that road, especially at night, is so narrow and the bikers are struggling to stay within that small lane. And just for safety concerns, how could we improve that interconnectivity from that side of the city going toward Murphy Road, you know, to the, I guess, the main city center, which is here and beyond?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner LaFalle, yes, great observation, and thank you for that. Specifically to that specific location, we're at the project inception, so we're not there yet with respect to determining specifics, but certainly appreciate the note on that. And staff has made it clear, and we have a strong desire too as well. I mean, the intent of this plan is to identify seamless bike and ped connections throughout the community. Certainly, Maricopa, as are many communities, are no stranger to scallop streets and narrowing roads and what the pinch points on bike lanes. We do a lot of studies in that respect with downtown Phoenix and the city of Phoenix, for example. So I'm taking your note on that specific area, and we will evaluate that. But there is a desire to have complete streets, if you will, that notion of a street providing for all modes of transportation, transit, automobiles, bike, and ped. So in that regard, we will be identifying those opportunities and taking note on that area that you're speaking to specifically.
I think and this is my last comment for now, a concern that I really want to convey is when we're dealing with that land that we don't control because it's owned either by the universities or the Native American communities or private owners and who are not willing to give in to the land. Just how could we implement more effective transportation in those areas that is safer?
I think that's a great comment, Commissioner LaFalle, because staff has made that exact point, quite frankly, is that the roadway cross-sections that you have adopted right now through your existing plan are pretty solid in nature. There's not a lot of desire to provide any kind of radical change to what you have on the books, but it's looking at better enforcement or implementation mechanisms to make things like that happen, just as you point out. So thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Irving? Commissioner Irving?
Comment. You mentioned you're going to have a public open house May 23rd, which I think is great. My concern is I think it's really important, and you talk in 6 and 7 about future growth. If there's a way to be able, not solutions, but to be able to tie in areas that we've approved for growth and roadways in it. In other words, just to show that at least, not that you have a solution for it, that if we just approve a housing unit for 400 people, whatever, that there's a plan for that. Because I think what we hear as people say, well, all this growth and no plan. And this is so great just as we go along to show people that, yes, in other words, it's a matching between each development we've approved and infrastructure to go with that. Going both, especially east-west, because people want to talk about the 347, and my concern is getting to it, which is what this is going to address. So I think that would really be helpful, just to let people know that there is a study, and for each development there is a plan, because what we get is, oh yes, it meets the guidelines for traffic, but you clearly say it's going to meet the guideline for traffic in the future. And to me, that's just so important to let people know that the plans go hand in hand, if that makes sense.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Irving, yes, good comment. Appreciate that. There is certainly a lot of moving pieces and parts with respect to development, obviously in Maricopa, as you obviously know. And we are doing our darndest to get our hands on that information. And yes, that is absolutely, the plan will recognize interim growth stages, but it is looking at future growth as well as what the ultimate solution, seamless solution for a roadway should be. That is supposed to incorporate. Okay, great. Thank you for the comment.
Okay. Commissioner Robertson?
Yes, thank you for the briefing. I see our role, it's really a 30,000-foot briefing right now as the project kicks off. So I don't have any specific comments about a specific item, other than, we got to keep in mind that interior flow in the city is somewhat constrained. We don't have a lot of room for more internal roads other than in the new subdivisions. So that, that's going to have to be an emphasis of mine as we move through the future as the plan develops. I didn't see a mention of the city of Casa Grande being a stakeholder. We're gonna butt up against them. They're going to butt up against us. If the Santa Cruz subdivision south of town develops, with what was the number, 17,000 potential people or something like that, and limited access in and out of there, the adjoining city of Casa Grande might be important to include in some of those long-range plans, or loop roads, the Sonoran Desert Parkway. Of course, they're on board already with that. So I really see this as a 30,000-foot briefing. I think it's important to continue the work that was done on the 2017 traffic plan, and that's what I see this as, continuation and modernization of it with the new situations as they arise. So I appreciate it. No real specific comments at this point. Look forward to engaging as it moves forward.
Thank you. Thank you for the
Okay.
comments.
Commissioner Hughes, any comments?
Well, I tell you what, the majority of questions I already get, it's just being on the committee a short time, was all, what is our next plan for 347? With the voters in Maricopa, the city of Maricopa approving it, and the county voters voting the referendum down, what is you see the future of real improvements on 347, and what can we do to help you?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Hughes, yes, if I understood your question correctly, it seems like it's focused on State Route 347, which of course receives a lot of interest and discussion. And there's people in this room that could answer that question specifically better than I can at this point, but I would just leave it at, we're well aware with this study of 347. You're aware that ADOT has just awarded a project for design of 347 just north of town to help alleviate congestion, and I am aware of the fact that there was a turnback agreement between ADOT and the city with respect to owning and operating the roadways, 347 and others, within the city limits. But beyond that, specific solutions or objectives beyond that right now, I'm not in a position to do that since we're at the inception of the study. But is there something specifically you wanted us to be mindful of?
I'd like to know what is the amount of money you need to do the improvement.
Well, you'll have to check back with us at the end of this project, of which we'll.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay. Oh, you know, I come from Illinois, and so I'm a short time in Arizona. I love this. I love the city of Maricopa, and I'm very privileged to be sitting here in this meeting. And my past government experience in another community and county, I know the word toll road in Arizona is a no-no, okay? And that's what I've been told, so, but when the voters continue to not support the cities or the counties in accomplishing the necessary things for the total community, then sometimes government has to step in and take a step forward and make the decision for them. And I think that's some thinking that maybe some people ought to be thinking about. And, you know, I'm not scared to step forward and take a step doing things for the betterment of the community. And I think we should start thinking about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Singleton?
I guess for me, the only thing is, you know, the website. I would love to just start spreading that around. I know a lot of people complain about 347, but, you know, if we can't flow to the 347, then, you know, that's a different issue. So I'm just excited. I'm glad that you said 100 and something have already, you know, filled out the survey. And then Commissioner LaFall mentioned the bike lanes. Those are kind of my concerns. I know people here do triathlons, and part of that is biking. And I've seen people almost get hit on these bike lanes. So I'm glad to see that was one of your items as kind of like a suggestion. But yeah, I just really hope that people attend these, you know, open houses that you have, because transportation's a hot topic here. And I hope that this will kind of alleviate some of the concerns that some of our citizens have. But yeah, just looking forward to those open houses.
Thank you for the comments. And I put the website on the specific link for both where you can find the survey and project information.
Commissioner Frank?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a necessary part of our growth here is to revisit the transportation plan. So I think it's a good step in the right direction. There's a lot of issues, many of them you've already touched on. So yeah, we don't have to go into those again, but look forward to seeing the results in the open houses.
I know we don't have to open a public meeting, and I don't have any speaker cards. Is there anyone who would like to come up and make a comment or ask a question of the commission or the speaker? If not, okay. Or any other comments, suggestions? No. Let's just have a few.
I do have one thing.
I'm sorry.
I stand corrected. Commissioner LaFalle pointed out that Casa Grande was on that list at the end.
Yeah, thank you.
I missed it.
I was remiss for not pointing that out, but yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I see three areas that we've got to keep a close eye on. We talk about current conditions tied into the future conditions. As the number of apartments continues to grow, that creates its own form of congestion, and I think we have to really keep a close watch on it. The charter schools, we have had a congestion problem there, and I think it continues to some extent, and that's something else that we have to watch. If there's no other discussion, I think we can, nothing else? No. We can bring this matter to a conclusion. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the time, and I'll be back to see you in about a year or so. But
okay.
Thank you.
Awesome.
And move along to item number 5.2, which is PZ 23-04, Planning Commission update. Rick Horst, City Manager, will provide an update to the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding the roles, responsibilities, and the best practices of the Maricopa Planning and Zoning Commission, and this is discussion only.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me some time today. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize that Nick Cook was given the night off, and we have Dennis Fitzgibbons, our city attorney, here. We are both here at the request of the City Council to conduct the training, which we discussed a couple of months ago, which we will be doing biannually going forward with all of our boards and commissions. So as we go through this process, if you have an easy question, I'll be happy to take it. If you have a hard one, we'll deflect it to Dennis over here. And if I say anything wrong, he will certainly jump in to correct me. I kind of have the comments for tonight in 4 groups, and between each group we'll stop to ask questions or seek clarifications or to receive rebuttals, as the case may be, as we go forward. So with that, let's start with just what the code says. If I can figure, which button, this one? There we go. So this is right out of our city code. And I'm sorry, this is out of the Arizona statute. It says a planning agency means the official body designated by local ordinance to carry out the purposes of this article and may be a planning department, a planning commission, a hearing officer, the legislative body themselves, or any combination thereof. We fall under the any combination thereof. The roles of the City Council, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Development Services Department and the Zoning Administrator are set forth within the City Code. So, within the City Code, Section 18, under Creation and Purpose, the Director of the Development Services Department, which is Rodolfo, or his designee, the Director directs the work of the Department and the Planning and Zoning Division and leads the department in fulfilling its mission. So what are their duties and powers? The Development Services Director shall have the duty to carry out the provisions and intent of the general plan and this code. The Development Services Director or designee shall have the power to do the following. Creation and purpose. So duties and powers, we'll skip down to it. The zoning administrator shall have the duty to carry out, and by the way, the zoning administrator is Rick. He's been appointed to that post by Rudy as the department director. So the zoning administrator shall have the duty to carry out the provisions and intent of the general plan of this code. The zoning administrator shall have the power to hold a public hearing, to review approve, continue, deny, or approve with conditions the following: zoning permits, minor development review permits, temporary use permits, waivers, minor modifications to waivers and temporary use permits, administrative use permits, and modifications to zoning permits, administrative use permits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's quite a bit there. So this is what the code says. Now, to some degree, we've been doing a hybrid of that, partly because early when the codes were first written, they were designed after pattern ordinances and codes, but there were less staff, and you depended more on the Planning and Zoning Commission to do work, and its natural evolution over the last 20 years has got us to a different point. The zoning administrator shall interpret the code as needed. Interpretation of this code includes, but is not limited to, clarification of intention, determination of zoning classifications of land uses not specific to this code, and the delegation of processing, procedures, and requirements. The zoning administrator shall keep a record of interpretations made pursuant to this section, and that's for consistency purposes. The record of interpretation shall be made available to the public. The zoning administrator shall serve on the technical advisory committee and advise on matters relating to development in subdivision plat applications. The advisory committee is the input from all of our departments: police, fire, streets, our public utilities, and others that we involve in that process. The zoning administrator may carry out any functions and duties specified in this code, and the zoning administrator shall delegate administrative functions as deemed necessary to execute the intent of this code to members of the Development Services staff. So City Code, Planning and Zoning Commission, so what's your job? The Planning and Zoning Commission is created to hold public hearings to provide analysis and recommendations to the City Council regarding general land use policies and applications where the Commission has such advisory responsibility, and to render decisions on specific applications where the Commission has been assigned decision-making authority by this code. And of course, that's a determination of the City Council, and they may amend that as they see fit from time to time, not only with the authorities and powers they give to the Planning and Zoning Commission, but the authorities and powers they give to staff as well. The purpose of the Planning and Zoning Commission is to support creation of a desirable environment throughout the city for residents, business, and industry in areas for which it is the responsibility for promoting harmonious, safe, attractive, and compatible development that is in the best interest of public health, safety, and general welfare. Now, I've said it before, you've heard me say I have 6 children, I have 15 grandchildren. When I ask them anything, I get 15 opinions, 6 opinions, and when you ask a family of 70,000, you're probably going to get more than one opinion too. And likewise, we're going to get more than one opinion from you, which is the beauty of having multiple people on a commission or on a city council, because frankly, if you all thought alike, we'd only need one of you. So it's good that you don't think alike, and that's the beauty of what we're trying to do. It goes on to say the Planning and Zoning Commission shall have the duty to carry out the duties outlined in Chapter 2.15 of the Maricopa City Code, and more specifically is responsible for the following. Initiation powers. The Planning and Zoning Commission shall have the power to initiate and hold public hearings and public hearings on general plan amendments, zoning code map or text amendments, and area-specific plans. Decision-making responsibilities. The Planning and Zoning Commission shall have the power to hold public meetings and public hearings to review and approve, continue, deny, or approve with conditions, conditional use permits and modifications to such permits, and major development review permits and modifications to such permits. And again, that's how the code is written presently. You now also have an advisory role. In the advisory role, the Planning Commission can hold public meetings and hearings to advise and recommend to the City Council. The general plan amendments and major amendments, zoning map amendments, zoning code text amendments, preliminary subdivision plats, PAD districts, and area-specific plans. So in this case, when your recommendation, which is majority consensus of this body, goes to the City Council, The City Council has that recommendation. They may also have a recommendation from the staff that may mirror yours completely or not at all. And then, of course, we have the public, who then, through the process, has the right to vet and express try to influence the City Council. So the City Council has the benefit of your commission recommendations, staff, and the public, and then they have to work to figure out what is the best answer out of that. The Planning and Zoning Commission may recommend in connection with any application such conditions as the Commission deems necessary in order to fully carry out the provisions and intent of this code, keeping in mind the difference between those that you have decision-making authority and those things that you only have advisory authority. And we'll get into a little more detail on that as we go through this session. So I'm going to pause there for a minute and see, how do I back this slide up? The red one, maybe? Yeah. I want you getting ahead of me. So right now, this is our current code. And you'll recall that when we met 2 months ago, there were actually four proposals to make changes. So tonight, 2 of those items we've elected to not change at all. The third one is we're still going to ask you to take on the role of the Traffic Advisory Committee for that once-a-year public hearing when we have to hear the public with regard to our transit federal application for transit dollars. And the fourth one is one that I want to talk about now, which you may recall we said that DRPs ought to be a fully administrative process. And we heard what you had to say, and we heard what some of the public and council had to say. So what I'm about to give to you is a hybrid, and we'll see how it goes. So the development review process is intended to promote orderly development in the city and ensure that such development occurs in a manner that is harmonious with the surrounding properties, is consistent with the general plan and other related governing documents. And I want to stress other related governing documents. It could be design review guidelines, it could be any number of other things that have been formally adopted, overlay zones, whatever those things may be. The city currently requires a neighborhood meeting for any land use changes, such as rezoning, planned area development, or general plan amendment, but does not for a DRP. The purpose of a neighborhood meeting is to provide a means for the applicant, surrounding residential neighbors, and registered neighborhood and homeowners association representatives to review a preliminary project and solicit input and exchange information about the proposed project prior to public hearings. But in truth, it's prior to anything. Before staff has comments, before anyone has anything, they have this public meeting and they present the concept to the public and ask them, okay, this is your chance for feedback. Okay, so the preliminary meeting is intended to result in an application that is responsive to neighborhood concerns and to expedite and lessen the expense of the review process by avoiding needless delays, appeals, remands, or denials. Developers are often sensitive to neighborhood concerns and will typically make reasonable adjustments to address said concerns. Given feedback early in the process enables the developer to consider design solutions, and some of the good feedback are as follows. That back wall of the proposed apartment building is too close to my backyard. Or the proposed parking or security lights might shine into my window. Or the proposed outdoor common area would be right next to my property line. If they're having parties, it may be too noisy. Those type of things are things that you want to hear up front, right? So experience tells us that such meetings are poorly attended, if at all, and in many cases, citizens tend to not get involved until the noticed P&Z meeting where the DRP is presented for final approval. At this early stage, staff are reviewing the plans with the developer and are discussing any needed changes. Our current process, I see some typos in here I thought I cleaned up, allows for public and commission comments at the very end of the process after months of time and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars have been spent. So in essence, if we wait till the hearing by the commission at that stage, it's difficult to put in changes. We've been through months, sometimes years of process. We've gotten to the 11:30 hour, and then we say, oh, but what about, oh, but what about, oh, but what about, oh, but what about? So here's the proposal. It's proposed that we change that process. And we have an informational meeting that would be called by the city and convene the applicant, the surrounding residents, the HOA representatives, along with the commission and the applicant to review a DRP proposal at the time of its initial submission and gain that input and oversight early in the process at the very beginning where you can best influence the outcome rather than at the very tail end after months and months and tens of thousands of dollars have been spent. It is proposed that we reserve the first meeting of each month for this purpose. This will allow all interested parties to provide feedback, inclusive of the commission, at a time when there is the best opportunity to influence design. The staff will then work with the developer to implement reasonable design solutions that do not conflict with the code. Then, based on this process, staff should be able to administratively approve DRPs, provided the DRP complies with the code and or adopted design guidelines. Any exceptions to the code or adopted design guidelines would have to come back to the P&Z. So again, the intent would be, let's ask your opinion as we're writing the last chapter, or do we ask your opinion when the concept is first presented? And I think there's a lot of value in that, and I think there's more value in doing it collectively as a body with the Planning Commission, staff, applicant, and citizens, rather than just the applicant and citizens meeting without staff there and without you being there. So that's something that I've talked with several of our city council members about, and they feel like probably makes sense because there is value, and the more eyes on the project, the better to get that. So again, further neighborhood opposition is not a reason to deny or amend a project. There are when people say, I just don't want it. If decision makers find that the development follows policies, regulations, and design guidelines, then they will typically approve it unless the required findings provide a basis to deny the project. And we're going to talk about what required findings means shortly. The general plan is the publicly approved blueprint for the city's growth. Remember, the general plan is voted on by all the people. And I suspect that that was not 100% of the people that approved the plan. But it was enough that it represented the majority and was approved and adopted by the city. So yes, there will always be people who don't like it. We always know that I love everything about it except not in my neighborhood. We all do that. You know, being a part of a city means that we share the good and the bad. Somebody has to live next to the fire station, and they're going to hear that siren go off. Somebody has to live next to the park, and they're going to hear the crack of the bat when the kids hit that ball and the parents cheering when he hits a home run. Someone's going to have to be close to the school zones that say slow down the traffic. Someone's going to be next to the animal shelter, which we don't have now, but probably will one day, or the dog park, and you're going to hear but that's what citizenry is all about. This, give me everything that works and nothing that doesn't work, is not citizenship. So that's an important part of this. So I bumped into this section and didn't give you a chance to talk about the codes and the rules first. So let's go back and have questions on that, and then I'd like your comments on this proposal. So going back to the state statutes and city codes, any questions or comments related to any of that? No? Okay. Thoughts on this proposal?
Okay, Commissioner LaFalle?
I have a question, just for clarification. Thank you so much for the information. Just confirming that we'll have our same meeting schedule, just that first meeting of the month would be reserved for this new process. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Robertson?
That was basically my question also, how you envisioned that joint meeting on the front end happening. And I do think on the front end is very important. That will relieve a lot of anxiety and curiosity that we come to you with when it's at the final stage and we didn't know what was in the first stage. So some of our getting out of our lane, is the term we use, has been related to our curiosity as human beings. I like the proposal. I have come to learn that we have to rely on the experts and professionals within our staff. If the sidewalk needs to be 38 inches or 48 inches, it doesn't matter to Bill Robertson. If it meets the code and our staff says it's appropriate, it's a blank. It's a no-brainer. We don't have to discuss it. We don't have to bring it up, and I think we could do a better job, and I think your proposal helps that aspect. We have to rely on the experts. We have to rely on our staff. If it meets the code, then the discussion is very limited. There could be some curiosity questions, or maybe I have a question that was brought to me by a citizenry that I want answered publicly for the record, then that may still happen. But we could sure limit, for lack of a better word, too much debate on things that have been vetted by our professional staff. I think this meets that intent.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I agree with that 100%, but as, let's say, a project comes forward and 4 or 5, 6 things come out of that meeting that need to be incorporated, staff won't keep you in a vacuum. They'll come back just as a matter of staff reporting, not action items, to say, we were successful in getting this done, or we moved this, or we compromised here. Just to keep you in the loop, and by keeping you in the loop, we're keeping the public in the loop. Other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, and that exactly was my question. I like moving it forward, but could you talk a little bit about the process to keep in the loop? I mean, just for our information, because I think that's important. All this comes up, and then again, the process changes why or whatever, just so, you know, we're informed of the thought processes, because what does keep me in the loop mean? How would that work?
Well, in truth, we may hear a lot of different comments from people, but maybe there's 20 or 30 things, but some of those things are just not realistic.
Okay.
So, but what are the things that are realistic? You should have pedestrian access. You should, you know, whatever those things are that kind of is the consensus agreement that comes out of the meeting, then we keep you up to date on those things. A good example was the condos project, which was tabled 2 or 3 times to come back. You know, the pedestrian access, and there was a few other things that came out of this body, again, late in the process. You know, that was 2 or 3 comebacks to get that all done. We can address those type of things earlier on in the process, and it's just a staff report at the end of the meeting, whoever is assigned. By the way, we've been, remember those 6 issues we talked about? We now worked out 4 of them.
Okay.
You know, that sort of thing. And frankly, that would be incumbent upon staff to make sure they do that. And Mr. Chairman, if they don't, then you need to let me know, and I'll do that.
Okay, so they'll be through staff. That's fine.
Commissioner Frank?
Yeah, I like it. Having been on the other side as a design professional, having the most information up front would really help the whole process go smoother. So I think that's definitely a way to go. My concern before was just eliminating that review process altogether. I was concerned about the perception of cutting the public out to some degree and not having them in there. But I really like this and having everybody invited to the table, and everybody can give their input at that time early in the process.
And I think having it here on a city noticed meeting will get more public attention than just the applicant sending a letter out to the neighbors and meet me at the church or library or wherever they're meeting. There's something about city letterhead and the city logo that says, pay attention. Not everyone will, but I think we'll have a better shot at getting more public participation in the process. And the public will be told too that as you go through, if you want to know what's going on, stay tuned to these meetings, but pick up a phone and call whoever the project manager is and just ask the question. Because they don't know who they are when they go through the neighborhood meeting now. They, you know, but now they'll come here, and if it's Alex over here, he's going to say, that's my project, here's my card, call me. Now, that doesn't mean they can continue to influence them. It's about where are we on those things that we kind of consensus agreed to make changes on.
Okay. Commissioner Singleton.
Yeah, I really like this proposal. I think it kind of balances everything out. I know a lot of the concerns were transparency. If we just completely cut this out, I think having it at the beginning allows for that transparency for the citizens. But yeah, I think this kind of balances everything, what the staff wanted, what, citizens, voice their concerns about, and even staff, so.
Okay.
The only comment I have, and I agree with everything you presented, and I think it will streamline what we're doing. I think it's going to satisfy a lot more people at a lot of different levels. When we, as a body, and I'm not going to mention names, but we talked about the size of balconies and the kind of trees and shrubs, and we're looking at the landscape chart, and they're allowed on there, but yet we're telling them, no, maybe you should go in another direction. One side of the street parking. These are the kind of questions I question that we should be asking. And it's refreshing to see your approach on this.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I guess you can ask the question, but you don't have authority to tell them to change it. If it meets the code, it meets the code.
Exactly.
Now, if we feel we need to change the code, that's a different story. And you as a commission could ask that something in the code be revisited. Now, what will probably happen is staff's not going to jump all over themselves making changes. They're going to take your comments back to the city council. And if the city council says, I think that's worthy of a discussion, let's look into it, we will. If the council says, we like it the way it is, we won't. Is that fair enough?
Well, I think that's covered what I really like under the section of recommendations where you gave those examples.
Right.
I think we can handle, I don't like this, as a, and it's just a recommendation. What they do with it is what they do with it. But I really like the fact, and those examples were perfect, that we could give either as an individual or as a group. So we're still free to do that, but it's clear it's just a recommendation. So I don't, I think, I like the fact we still have the option to do that.
I told you I had 15 grandchildren, 12 of them are granddaughters. So if we go to do an activity, it's got something to do with princesses and pink, whereas I'd rather do, go race cars or something like that. So it's always in the eye of the beholder. And we all bring our personal preferences to the table, right? I've said it for many, many years that, the market gets it right 80, 85% of the time, and cities get it right about 30% of the time. They're the ones selling the product. They're the ones that got at least the tenants. They know what their people want. And for me to say, and by the way, I've been through this lawsuit more than once, where the city has said, you're not going to do this. Well, let me just give you an example without saying cities. It was a mixed-use project. It had single family, it had multifamily, it had office, and it had a nice retail component. And when we got to that 11:30 hour, everyone showed up, and we don't want any multifamily. So at the end of the day, they approved it without multifamily. 2 years later, 4 years later, 5 years later, people saying, where's all the retail you promised me? And they said, you don't have the population to support it. You can't make something happen. So it's one of those be careful what you ask for type things, right? And so I think it's important, and I think we have to be careful that we don't let our public think that you can bring up things like, do they really have to have that shade of color wall? Because those things, I was going to say a dime a dozen, but there's a lot more than that as a part of that process. So what we'll do is we'll refine this, and we'll work with our, to bring this back formally to the city council, and then if the council agrees, then we'll make that legislative change. Have a question?
I have one more comment or request, please. When we begin this new process, is it possible to convey what was mentioned in your this report to us to the public, explaining how important it is for citizenry, how important it is that you don't have the ability to change this and change that, but we do want your feedback because it does help while we're implementing these different projects.
I think when we have those meetings, I think at the very beginning of the meeting, we should kind of lay out the ground rules.
Yes.
You hear Mayor Smith doing that when she talks about how much time you can say and what you can say, and you can't, say bad things about people, and we can follow a similar pattern, kind of laying that out. Now, you and I both know that there will be some citizens who feel like, they should be heard, and it's okay to hear whatever they say, and I'm going to talk about in a minute about the value of opinions from a legal point of view. Now, opinions are all valuable, but from a legal point of view, opinions have to be backed by some degree of evidence. And then we have people come in all the time about, don't have water, or we don't this or that, and it's kind of like, where'd you hear that from? Oh, the real estate agent told me. Those type of things, so.
Just one comment, and that is, I think we have two things that we have to be careful of. One is the NIMBY process, not in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And in concert with that is looking at the greater good. And I think these are two things that we've always got to keep in mind when we're considering anything. Thank you very much. I appreciate your talk tonight.
Yeah, I do have just a few more items, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay, good.
I know you want to get out of here, but I want to talk about required findings.
Cut him off.
Good try, Joe.
As a chair.
This one's kind of important. So, in order to approve or deny, or somewhere in between, you have to state required findings. Now, required findings is whenever you take action on an item, it should provide written findings related to that action, which is usually done by adopting the staff report as presented or as amended. Should it be amended? Now, in truth, it shouldn't be amended unless they bring conditions to you that are variations from the code. Like, let's say they want a waiver in the number of parking stalls. That will come back to you, and that will be the only thing you consider. You don't get to reopen up the color of the walls or those other things that have been approved by code, but whatever those things are, you have to do that and then grant findings as to why that's denied or not or approved, whatever. So the required findings create a link between an adopted plan, policy, or ordinance and the Planning Commission's formal recommendation or decision. So in other words, we're linking it back to the general plan, we're linking it back to the city code, we're linking it back to any of the adopted design guidelines that have been publicly vetted and all those type of things. People say, well, I didn't have a voice in that. Well, the public did. It was presented to the public. Now, maybe you didn't live here when it was adopted, or maybe you chose not to come to the meeting because it wasn't in your backyard, but it was presented. Required findings are the specific reasons given by a municipality to either approve or deny an application. The thought process of the Planning Commission should focus on fact-based information relevant to community policies and standards. Ultimately, it is up to the applicant to demonstrate that they meet the community standard. Planning commissions typically hear a wide range of information and testimony during the course of an application, and it is the commission's responsibility to sift through it all. Not all facts are equal. It is the commission's job to weigh the applicability and credibility of the information. Opinions without a factual basis are without merit. Experts and citizens alike are entitled to their opinion. However, when people present opinions at meetings, the Planning Commission has a right and obligation to request and determine the basis of that opinion. So in other words, you're telling me this, where did this come from? Well, my friend's an engineer and they told me that's, would that hold up in a court? No. So in most cases, that data has been presented to you in your packet ahead of time. We want to hear them, but you can't just accept things at face value. They have to be fact-based. Staff report should propose a motion for approval supported by required findings. Our staff does that well sometimes and frankly not so well sometimes. I think we should prepare the motion that you can adopt that already states the findings within that motion, so you don't have to create that. Now, again, if you find that there's something wrong with that, that's different, but if you accept it, staff should be doing that work for you. They have to be legally defensible, so they have to identify with applicable laws. Staff will clearly state in the staff report a statement of applicable laws. Identify facts from opinions. Facts related to the request should be identified and should be supported by substantial evidence. Planning commissioners should avoid utilizing opinions in rendering decisions, as most opinions cannot be supported by evidence. Opinions that are not related to an applicable law the project must meet should not be considered. Now, at the same time, people always want to bring up, well, it's not really this, but it's something about over here. No, this is all we're talking about, this, but that may cause something else, or it may do this, or it may do that. Again, you go into a court of law, it's kind of like, well, I know I was speeding, but let me introduce my 16 people who all sped on the highway too. They just didn't get caught. That type of thing doesn't work. Form a decision that links the applicable law with the supporting facts or absence of the same. Staff reports should expressly state their findings, provide relevant facts to support them, and staff reports are templates for proposed findings subject to modification by the commission. Please.
Yeah, you asked, which I think is a good idea, is a legal Roberts question, where you said that the staff reports should be put in form of a motion to accept, which I think is good. Can the commission then amend that motion?
Yes. Let me back up a slide. It says the last one, staff reports are templates for proposed findings subject to modification by the commission.
I just want to make sure that I'm interpreting modification means a formal amendment.
But if you say I want to modify it to, I don't like those trees, I want a different type of tree, that's probably not going to work.
Oh, yeah, that's...
The plan says you got to have 15 trees, you only have 3, then that probably works.
Yeah, and I guess that's, yeah, you couldn't modify it that way, but there are times in the report that we think something needs to be clarified. A recommendation is different than a formal amendment. And I'm just asking, would that be appropriate for us if it was deemed within this guidelines to amend that motion? Because Robert says any motion can be amended. I'm just asking that.
Clarification should come much earlier than the motion. And those clarifications should be either directed to staff or the applicant to say, did I hear you to understand, say this, or could you tell me what you meant by that? You need to have that before you make the motion and not, now that information may cause you to have a finding of fact that doesn't allow you to approve it, or I approve it all with a condition or something like that. Would you like to speak to that, Dennis?
Yeah, no, I think, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I think you have every right to make that modification, but you want to make sure you understand the facts, and I think it's great to clarify it with staff first. And
no problem. I was just simply asking if there is a, that's all. Okay. Fine, that's all.
Almost done. So bear with me.
We'll let him finish. I'm sorry, I thought he was done with that. So.
These are best practices, and these come right out of the books. They're not my words. Focus on the big picture and focus on the project before you. Avoid being distracted by personalities, groups, or issues that do not have anything to do with the merits of the agenda item. Meeting procedures, establish rules, procedures, keep the meeting on track. We have a pretty good set of rules and procedures, which of course is governed by the chairman. Follow the law. Keep legal requirements in mind. When in doubt, ask legal counsel for advice. Before approving the application, you should be able to answer the following questions in the affirmative. Is the proposal consistent with the general plan? And if it's not, you need to be prepared to say why. Because frankly, staff should never bring something to you that we don't feel is consistent. So if you feel different, you need to be prepared to say why. Does it meet all applicable zoning and subdivision requirements? and is the Commission's decision supported by the required findings based on substantial evidence in the record. Stay informed. Prior to the hearing, Commissioners should have read their agenda packet and supplemental reports. And frankly, if you have questions, I would encourage you to pick up the phone and call staff. That's what I do at the City Council. Now, sometimes I'll raise the question anyway in a public meeting because they want the public to hear it. But the point is, we don't have that 20-minute education series going on. We get that done before the meeting, not during the meeting, okay? Open communication. Each commissioner shares a responsibility for the free flow of ideas and discussion among everyone present at a meeting, to include the applicant, staff, members of the public. Now, again, if it's a public hearing, once it's closed, it's closed. Now, if you have a point of clarification from a particular person, you have the right to ask that, but everyone's, as soon as you do that, well, can I have another 3 minutes? They had 3, can I have 3? And it just goes on and on and on. So I would caution you about that. Likewise, open communication, I would caution you that as a appointed member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, what you say to the public carries a lot of weight. And if you make opinions on something that's either before you or maybe before you in the future, which leads you to decide I might swing this way or that way, you could cause potential problems for the city or the applicant or others. So the place to share information and get information is here, because then all the public has the same equal opportunity to hear it. The side conversations, well, you told me this. Well, that was just my opinion. We have to be careful about those. And if, again, you're not sure, we'd ask you to talk to our legal about what you can and can't do. It's a tough process. Keep the meeting going at an efficient pace. If the meeting gets prolonged, people get tired. There's always saying that the mind can only handle what the seat can endure, if you know what I mean. And then effective leadership. We have a new chairman, and based on what I'm hearing with discussion between the chair and vice chair, they've already discussed, and it seems to me like they're going to have things well in hand and move it forward very nicely. Lastly, there are 2 items that have been presented to the state legislator as bills. Senate Bill 1103, in essence, would authorize municipalities to review and approve development plans, plats, and design review plans without a public hearing. Creates a self-certification program for architects and engineers and allow at-risk submittals for grading and drainage work and expedite permit review for compliant applications. Now, just so you know, as a city, we do not support the passage of this bill, primarily because it should be a local decision by local government leaders. But I will tell you, there are things afoot that want the state to say how every city should be. Every city should be homogenized into the same place, and every city should be different. It should be the makeup of what its membership wants it to be. So I would ask that you consider voicing an opinion. You can go online, opposition, opposed, whatever, with regard to this bill. The second one is actually one that I think is pretty good, and it says it would allow the city or town's website to be used for publishing notices of election, invitations for bids, noticing of contracts, et cetera, which includes what we do. Right now, we have to pay for an ad in a newspaper that is predominantly in another community and not our community, so very few people see it. Plus, the cost has really gotten enormous, and this will be a bill that would allow us to post online. It doesn't mean we won't continue to do the 600-foot notices and the signs and all those other things. It's just we could do it online, and then we can tie links to it where people can pull up all the charts and all the studies and the traffic study and whatever else those things are, and cut down on the cost of the taxpayer and then make it. So I just wanted to bring these 2 bills to your attention. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, real quick on the 347, even their minor proposal to solve part of the problem is a $290 million fix. If they would just give us half that amount of money, we can solve it. But I do want to tell you what we're doing. We've asked a couple of things. As you come into town, when you get to the cement factory, the cement trucks don't run after about 3 o'clock. Yet, traffic will stop waiting for those ghost trucks to turn. Why can't it be synchronized to where it doesn't even turn on their light? Or put in that strip where it won't trigger it unless a car approaches. Number two, we're talking about getting rid of both of those. I say we, this is our proposal to the state, both the concrete plant and the Casa Blanca. Meaning you take a right turn, you would accelerate, merge in, go a little bit further and swing back over and then decelerate and then do a U-turn coming back. So the traffic never stops. And we have asked them to give us about $18 million. Again, it's not our jurisdiction, it's not our road to do those two things. The third thing is the funding is there for Riggs Road. They have a 3-year planning process, and I realize these things take time, but at the same time, 3 years from now, it's going to cost $20 million more than it costs now. And we already had 50 million, 45, 6 million the first time, another 18 last year just for the cost of inflation. If we fix Riggs Road, we will solve 40% of our problem or more. And then last, the interchange at I-10, which is already funded through MAG. However, our governor is proposing that all existing contracts and projects be recalled, and they're going to reprioritize all those. So again, if you're interested, get engaged. The mayor is doing a great job. She was at the Capitol today, and we're coming up with solutions, and frankly, we're trying to solve problems, and we have a lot of support from our Representative Martinez and TJ Shope and some others, but we need all of you to make that happen. So I just wanted to share that information. If there's any questions on any other topics, I'm happy to address those. Otherwise, I'm happy to sit down.
The Transportation Advisory Committee duties that your proposal launches with us, could you give us, all I heard was a once-a-year annual meeting for grant approvals. Is that it?
Pretty much. This is not a transportation advisory in our road systems. This is a requirement from the federal government in order for us to qualify for our transit grant. Okay. It used to be 80-20, but now that we're over 50,000, it's 50-50. But that 50 is still important to us. So staff will conduct surveys and other things, and we'll present those findings to you, and you will adjourn out of the P&Z and put on your other cap, and then adjourn back. And any public comment, which may be, I want a bus stop here, or a new route, or it costs too much money, or whatever those things are, so that we can put all that together and submit our application to the federal government. So it really is basically a once-a-year meeting. There may be some exceptions, but that's what it would amount to.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Commissioner Hughes.
First of all, I want to thank you for your update. It's greatly appreciated because it is a quandary for you in the city. I know it is, very much so. And trying to hang on to monies is a very important issue for this community. And anything I can do on my behalf and lobbying the state legislature or anybody, I'll certainly do that. But the finding of fact is I've worked with that tool a lot of years, and I find it a very good tool. And I was wondering where it was at when I first started. And I think that the finding of fact is a thing, and I totally support.
Thank you. Appreciate your time tonight.
Commissioner Singleton, any comments? Commissioner Frank? Commissioner Irving?
Yeah, one question, sort of legal too. As far as, reasons to deny because it doesn't follow code, I was just questioning, and we've usually approved it, the whole issue of waivers. And should that be done at staff level or, for instance, the 120-foot patio thing, about how do you see us dealing with that? Because technically it's not in, but we've always agreed with what staff said, but how should that be handled?
Well, as you're aware, the code does provide some trade-offs.
Okay.
That's probably not the right word. If it falls within the provision of those trade-offs, which falls to this gentleman to make a determination, then it's just done. But if they come back and ask for something that's not within his purview, then you will have to address that. And you may say, Okay, it makes sense, but if you're not going to have that, I need more amenities in the common space. Because there are times when a balcony may not make sense. If it's overlooking a busy street, or sometimes these balconies become storage units and everyone can see everything that's stored, you know. There's just a lot of things. And so, you know, I find that cities try to legislate too much sometimes. And, you know, people say, well, that yard's too small. Well, some people really don't want a big yard. Other people do. And of course, you know, the market will determine if somebody wants to live in a condominium or a quarter-acre ranchette or an apartment. And I think most of our citizens understand the need for this diversity of housing. You know, the one project that we have that is Section 42, and I want to clarify what that means. It is not Section 8. Section 42 means that they are at the 80% of the household income for the city. So a family of four is making almost $60,000 a year to qualify to go into those units, okay? So it's not a Section 8 type project, and unfortunately we've all seen the TV shows about, you know, Chicago Fire and Chicago Police, and everything's in those old failed projects from the 60s, which has become the mind or thought concept. But at the end of the day, you know, and I would encourage you, by the way, on February 9th, which is our planning session with our city council, we're going to have Elliot Pollock present, who will also talk about housing about 1 o'clock. If you want to just come for that piece, you're certainly welcome to come to all of it. It is basically a work session with the council, but we'd love to have you there and participate on whatever parts of that you can. But we find that if we're really going to be what we want to be, and everyone says that we want all this retail, I promise you no one's going to drive from somewhere up in Tempe to come down here to take that $20 an hour cashier job. It's just not going to happen. And by the way, you've heard the units here in town that, you know, 5 days, they leased everything in the first phase. All those people are our residents, people that were living 2 and 3 families in a household, where the kids can now finally get out, or mom and dad can now finally get out. These are things that are really needed, and we just have to look at things very holistically. And again, that's where opinions come in, and we value all opinions. But again, what's best for the whole, as stated very succinctly and very nicely by the chairman.
Yes.
Well, in my career, 10 years I worked in public housing. I seen a lot of different ways of discrimination in public housing. Even cities that would deny bus service to certain shopping malls, so certain people could not shop, all right? So I've gone through a lot of those things and seen those things in my lifetime, and you know, everyone's a human being.
And everyone deserves a place to live.
In my hope, in my lifetime, everyone should have a home or a place to live.
Correct.
At no time would I ever, or should anybody, deny the right of anybody to have a roof over their head. Thank you.
Well, this unit over here, I think it's $1,200 a month for a 3-bedroom. There's a lot of single-family homes in this town paying a lot less than that for their monthly mortgage. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, the only thing I wanted to add, I agreed with everything Rick said, but just remember you have on your agendas the ability to go into executive session. So there's going to be times when legal issues come up during a meeting, and what we'd prefer, at least from the city attorney's office, if they show up in the middle of a public hearing, finish the public hearing, and then go into the executive session, because then you could get everything answered. And we just want to get the public hearing finished, just because there could be other legal issues that pop up during the middle of that public hearing. So don't be afraid. If you, obviously we want to get any legal questions you have before the hearing, talk to Rick, and he can answer them, or get them to us if you need Nick to answer them. But if something does come up during a hearing, don't feel like you got to guess. don't feel like, but just remember, you have an ability to go into an executive session. I just would ask that if it comes up during a public hearing, that you complete the public hearing, then go into the executive session, okay?
Thank you. Anything else for?
Dennis? Dennis, I have a question for you. Clarification, please. When we have a call to the public, and the call to the public is closed, and there are no further public hearings on the agenda, is the public able to still speak on agenda items, or is it closed because the public hearing has passed? Or is that you, Ricky?
If it's a publicly noticed public hearing, the recommendation is once the public hearing has been closed, they should not be allowed to speak because it becomes a rebuttal back and forth. And by the way, I would also say they're here to address you, and this citizens talk shouldn't happen. They're here to influence you, not to convince people out there. And you can see that a lot. People are, and then clapping and yelling and those type of things really deter from the integrity of the meeting. If it's not a public hearing, you will allow people to speak as the agenda item comes up like you routinely do. But again, once it's done and they made all the comments and you move to your deliberations, they should not be allowed to step up unless you took a note and said, Mrs. Jones, you said something, I'd like to get a clarification. You can do that. But you don't open it up for that because everyone else will come up and they'll basically say the same things I already told you. Or they say, I disagree with what he said. I know better. We don't want that. This is a time to present their facts. Am I correct? So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Item number 6 on the agenda, reports from commissioner staff, from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just first and foremost, I would like to thank City Manager Horst for coming before us this evening. I'd also like to thank Kevin Kugler with Michael Baker International for providing his update this evening. Yeah, just a big shout out to both of those individuals. Nothing further to report at this point. I would just turn it over to, or back to Commissioner Frank, I think, would like to say a word or two.
Commissioner Frank?
So, yeah, I have an announcement this evening. This is my last P&Z meeting here. I've had a good time serving with y'all. It's been a privilege. It's kind of bittersweet. The bitter part is having to step down from serving on this side of the dais, but I get to serve on the other side as a city employee, and so I can't do both, obviously. So, but I really look forward to the challenge that presents, and being able to help continue to grow our city in that capacity.
Dan, it's been our pleasure, believe me. You've been a value to our commission, and we're going to miss you. But I know you're going to do probably bigger and better and greater things managing our surface water, because you've been the chair or president of the flood district for the last how many years? It's been a long time. Yeah. Thank you for your service.
Just to applaud the city for having the foresight to create that position. So I think everybody's going to be aware that
Okay. I assume that we do not need an executive session. Any discussion on that? Nope. Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Again.
Second? We are adjourned.